Rain had a way of washing away illusions, and that night it fell hard enough to make Marina Carter wonder if the heavens themselves were trying to tell her something. She sat motionless in her car, windshield wipers dragging back and forth like a heartbeat that couldn't keep up. The office building across the street glowed with warm light, its glass walls reflecting the city's pulse. Somewhere inside, her husband of 30 years was working late. Again. That's what she'd believed until an hour ago. Her phone still sat on the passenger seat, screen dimmed, but the words from that accidental email burned behind her eyes. Congratulations on your new property purchase, Mr. Robert Carter. Closing confirmed for 48 Brookside Lane. It wasn't their address. It wasn't even close. At first, she thought it must be a business investment. Robert had always been the ambitious one, the kind of man who loved acquisitions, deals, risks. She'd supported him through it all, even when it meant postponing her own dreams, even when she'd sold her grandmother's jewelry to help him start his first company. But then, something in that email caught her attention. The note at the bottom. We hope the new homeowner enjoys the private garden view from the master suite. Robert hated gardens. Marina loved them. She hadn't told him she was coming. She simply got in her car and followed the address. Each turn of the wheel twisted something deeper inside her, a rope she hadn't realized had been tightening for years. Now parked across the street from 48 Brookside Lane, she could see it, a pristine two-story home with white shutters and a rose-lined porch. Soft golden light spilled from the windows, and behind one of them, movement, shadows crossing, a man, a woman, laughter. Her breath caught. Marina's fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles blanched. She leaned forward just as the front door opened. Robert stepped out first, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder, smiling like the man she once fell in love with. Only this time the smile wasn't for her. A woman appeared behind him, barefoot, in a silk robe the color of champagne. Her hair tumbled down her back, and when she reached for Robert's hand, Marina's chest constricted so violently she thought she might be sick. The woman whispered something. Marina couldn't hear it, but whatever it was made Robert laugh. That sound, once her comfort, now felt like a blade. Rain pelted the windshield harder, blurring the scene, but Marina couldn't look away. She watched as they kissed on the doorstep, careless, easy, practiced. The kind of kiss born from routine, not guilt. Her world tilted. 30 years of shared breakfasts, late-night talks, and silent sacrifices collapsed into a single image of betrayal framed by raindrops. Her heart didn't just break, it calcified. She wanted to scream, to storm across the street and tear down that perfect little house, with her bare hands. But something colder stopped her, a voice deep inside her that whispered, "Not tonight, not yet." She sat there until the lights inside dimmed and Robert's car disappeared down the street. Only then did she start the engine. The rain had turned to mist, and her reflection in the rearview mirror looked like someone she didn't recognize. Eyes swollen, lips trembling. But beneath it all, a quiet, dangerous calm. On the drive home, memories flooded her mind like ghosts in a storm. The first time Robert brought her roses. The nights she stayed up helping him polish investor presentations. The day he'd promised, "I'll always protect what we build together." What they'd built, he'd just given away. When she pulled into their driveway, the house looked unchanged. Warm light glowing through the kitchen window, her favorite hydrangeas swaying in the wind. Inside, everything was in its place. The tea kettle, the wedding photo, the scent of cinnamon from the candle she'd lit earlier. The familiarity of it all felt cruel. Marina moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching surfaces that suddenly felt foreign. On the mantel, a picture of their anniversary trip to Italy caught her eye. They were smiling on a bridge in Venice. She remembered that day vividly. Robert had been distracted even then, glued to his phone, taking work calls. She laughed quietly, a bitter, broken sound. "Work calls," she whispered to herself. In the quiet of that empty house, Marina finally let the tears come. Not the soft kind that healed, but the silent kind that burned. Every drop carried a piece of trust, of belief, of the woman she used to be. When the tears ran out, she stood straighter, wiping her face with the back of her hand. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Something inside her, something old, patient, and powerful, shifted. She didn't know what she would do yet, but she knew this much. Robert Carter had no idea what kind of woman he had betrayed, and as she turned off the lights and walked upstairs to their shared bed, one thought repeated in her mind, steady as her heartbeat. He built a new house for lies. I'll make sure it becomes his ruin. The morning after, Marina moved through the house with the precision of someone who had practiced domestic rituals for decades. She brewed coffee, folded a shirt Robert had left on the banister, and set his briefcase by the door. Her hands were steady. Inside, a different kind of work had already begun. Pain had turned to purpose. Where there had been a wife's open wounds, there now sat a woman assembling a plan with the quiet discipline of a locksmith learning a new set of tumblers. Robert walked into the kitchen with the same careless charm he always wore like cologne. "Late night," he said, kissing the top of her head as if nothing had happened. Marina answered with a smile that did not reach her eyes. She listened to his voice, cataloging his excuses. The client in town, an unexpected contract, closing on a property. Each excuse was a tile she turned over in her hands until the words on the back made sense. 48 Brookside Lane. A number, a place, a life built in secret. She let him go. Confrontation belonged to the impulsive. She was not that woman tonight. Instead, she moved as if on stage, performing the part of the oblivious spouse while taking inventory in the quiet margins of their marriage. She watched him leave with a calmness that unnerved even her. The door closed and the house inhaled. She exhaled and began to map the pieces of his world. Marina had always been practical with money. The early years of marriage had required that. Two people building a life from scratch, trading nights at the kitchen table for the dream of stability. She'd learned the language of ledgers, the rhythm of receipts. That fluency would serve her now. She drove to the bank in the late morning, a small legal pad on the passenger seat and determination on her face. She smiled at the clerk in the way a woman smiles at a neighbor, friendly, unthreatening, while the real conversation happened under the polite veneer. "Just updating some account details," she told them. The clerk typed, clicked, and handed over information that made cold smoke rise in Marina's chest. Properties listed in Robert's name, company shares tied to him, joint accounts that drained into hidden ones. A mortgage payment flagged as Brookside Trust sat like a dark jewel among the statements. No one asked why a man who traveled the world for deals had purchased a house whose address suggested suburban anonymity. No one needed to ask. She hired a private investigator under the pretense of a neighborly dispute. Details she invented on the spot about a stray dog and a noisy contractor. The investigator's first report arrived within days. Photos of Robert dropping off furniture at the Brookside address at odd hours, canvas boxes marked with familiar logos, a landscaper's invoice submitted to a corporate account. Chloe's name, small, almost whisper-thin, appeared in a ledger the investigator photographed. Marina read it as if it were a script she had been missing her whole life. At home, the house was the same as it had always been. The worn armchair where she mended shirts, the framed diploma Robert teased about, the chipped teacup he claimed was quaint. Inside that familiarity, Marina cataloged the betrayal like one catalogs tools, each one with a purpose and each one to be repurposed. She photographed receipts, copied bank statements, and began to build a private archive that would balance what felt like a moral ledger. She also began to measure the fine lines of Robert's lies in human terms. She called Chloe, pretending to be a woman interested in garden design, and asked if she might visit Brookside to discuss planting. Chloe's voice, young and bright over the line, betrayed no awareness of a woman whose life she had invaded. She referred to Robert as sweet and thoughtful, and mentioned offhand how relaxed she felt there. "Like it's my place already," she said. Marina's pulse slowed. The words were not new to her. She had heard similar phrases in the mouths of friends and acquaintances for 30 years. But spoken by this woman about this house, they became instruments. Evenings were the hardest. She would sit in the living room and watch the streetlight pool on the pavement like a scar. Robert returned later each night, always smelling faintly of someone else's perfume, always humming as if guilt were a tune one could sing away. He never suspected that every casual mention of a meeting, every grin he flashed at a text on his phone, fed a web Marina was weaving with patient hands. She visited their attorney, not to file but to ask questions. What could she access? Which assets could be protected, and which were irrevocably Robert's? The attorney, a man who'd known them for years, blinked at the changes in her tone. Marina had always spoken softly. Now there was steel beneath the silk. She explained in measured sentences, offering up the facts she'd collected, steering conversation away from melodrama and toward legality. He advised caution and secrecy. He warned that haste could dismantle the very leverage she hoped to build. That advice pleased her. She wanted strategy, not spectacle. While the world around her assumed a couple's argument was inevitable in public, Marina refined the opposite: privacy, control, and timing. She opened a small account at a different bank under a name that could not be traced through Robert's existing financial footprint. She began to move modest amounts, checks for antiques, a cashier's check for a locksmith, transactions that appeared ordinary to anyone glancing at a statement. Each transfer was a pebble placed in a small dam she intended to break when the time was right. On the third week, when she found a florist's receipt tucked in the pocket of a jacket she'd been mending, marked with the Brookside return address, something like pity rose in her. Not for Robert, never for him, but for the woman who had been woven into his lie. Marina folded the receipt into an envelope and set it with the others. She had not yet decided how to use them. She only knew this: secrets were the currency of ruin, and she was becoming very rich. At night she dreamed not of revenge, but of reclamation, a life she could build without waiting for permission. She didn't yet know the shape of that life, only that it would be honest in hers. In the half-dark, she whispered promises into the pillow. Careful, unflashy vows, legal moves, contacts to call, alliances to form. The storm had passed from the sky, but it brewed within her, a precise and patient thing that would not be appeased until everything owed was returned. Marina had always believed that silence could be more powerful than speech. It was a lesson life had taught her over 5 decades, in boardrooms, in family dinners, in the pauses between arguments. Now that silence had a purpose. It was a weapon. She had gathered enough evidence to ruin Robert a dozen times over, but paper and signatures weren't enough. She needed to see her, the woman who lived in the house that should have been hers to decide. Marina wanted to look into the eyes of the person who thought she had stolen her husband and see if she could recognize the same brand of arrogance that Robert once wore like armor. The opportunity arrived quietly through a simple phone call. She called the Brookside Lane house, her voice calm and professional. "Hello, this is Mrs. Thompson," she lied smoothly. "I'm following up regarding the homeowner's interior consultation. We just wanted to confirm the color palette you selected." The voice on the other end was young, soft but self-assured. "Oh, Robert mentioned someone might call," the woman replied. "Yes, please come by. I've been wanting to make some changes." Marina smiled faintly. Of course he mentioned someone. The arrogance of deceit was that it assumed the world would cooperate with it. She arrived at Brookside that afternoon, wearing a beige coat and pearl earrings. Not the broken wife tonight, the professional, the observer. The house looked even more polished in daylight, with its perfect hedges and tasteful porch. When the door opened, Marina came face to face with Chloe. The woman was in her mid-30s, effortlessly put together, with the kind of beauty that seemed manufactured by wealth and time. Not earned, but borrowed. She looked at Marina with polite curiosity. "Come in, please. Robert said we should start with the living room." Marina stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of lavender and champagne, an unsettling imitation of her own home. And everywhere she looked, she saw herself. The same cream-colored curtains she once picked, the same frame print she'd hung in their old apartment, even the same brand of teapot on the counter. Robert hadn't just cheated, he'd replicated her. Chloe poured coffee, unaware she was hosting the woman her affair had destroyed. "Robert said he wanted something timeless," she said cheerfully. "He's amazing, you know. So attentive." The words hung like smoke. Marina studied the woman's face, searching for cruelty and finding none. Just ignorance, and perhaps a hint of entitlement. "You must be very lucky," Marina said. voice steady, eyes sharp. I am, Chloe replied easily. He said his wife didn't understand him anymore, that she was cold, always nagging about money. I told him life's too short to live like that. Marina's throat tightened, but her expression didn't change. She placed her cup down gently. Men often say that, she said, especially the kind who can't live with the truth. They build. Chloe blinked, sensing a shift she couldn't name. You sound like you've met a few. I have, Marina said softly. Some even thought they could build new lives without destroying the old ones first. A silence stretched between them. Marina stood, walking toward the window where the sunlight poured in, casting her reflection beside Chloe's. Two women, one illusion. For a brief second, she almost pitied the girl. Almost. Before she left, Marina turned and said with a small, enigmatic smile, If I were you, I'd make sure every house I lived in was truly mine. Chloe frowned, confused. What do you mean? Marina buttoned her coat. Just that deeds and love letters are written in the same ink. Easy to sign, easy to erase. She left before Chloe could respond. Outside, the winter air felt electric. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, Marina didn't feel weak. She felt awake. That evening, Robert came home humming, his phone lighting up with messages he tried to hide. Marina set his dinner on the table, smiled and asked, Busy day at the office? He froze for just a second, a micro-expression most would miss, then laughed it off. The usual chaos. You know how it is. Oh, I do, she said quietly, slicing her steak. I really do. When he turned away, Marina allowed herself a rare, secret smile. She wasn't planning on confronting him. Not yet. That would be too easy. She wanted him to keep believing in his illusion. The perfect life, the trusting wife, the house for his future. Because only when a man feels truly safe does he fall hard enough to lose everything. That night, as he snored beside her, Marina stared at the ceiling, her mind a symphony of precision. She had seen the house. She had met the mistress. She had measured the lies. Now it was time to start dismantling the empire. One asset, one signature, one secret at a time. And this time, she wouldn't just take what was hers. She'd take what he thought could never be taken from him. The morning sun spilled through the blinds like an accusation, slicing thin lines of gold across the kitchen counter. Marina stood by the sink, her coffee untouched, watching Robert scroll through his phone with the self-satisfied calm of a man who believed he was untouchable. Every so often, his mouth twitched into a smile, one of those secret ones. She had stopped asking who it was for. The answer no longer mattered. Don't forget the business dinner tonight, he said, buttoning his shirt. Might run late. Of course, Marina replied softly. She smiled, and that same polite, practiced smile that had become her shield. It was easier than letting him see how calm she'd become. Because if he looked closely, if he truly knew her, he'd recognize what that calm meant. It wasn't surrender, it was preparation. When the door shut behind him, the air in the house changed. The silence was no longer lonely. It was charged. Every clock tick, every hum of the refrigerator, every creak in the floorboards seemed to pulse with purpose. Marina moved through her day with deliberate precision. First, she called an old friend, a real one, an attorney who owed her a favor. She didn't explain everything, just enough to draw a careful map of what she could legally claim. She learned something Robert never bothered to remember. Most of their joint investments had been built on her initial contributions, her inheritance from her father's estate. That meant she had rights and power. The next step was quieter but just as dangerous. She began to sell what was hers, or what could be considered hers without question. Jewelry, antiques, collectible art pieces. Nothing dramatic, just small, steady withdrawals from a shared life. When the buyers asked why she was selling, she smiled. Downsizing, she said, starting fresh. Each sale was another secret, another step away from the woman Robert thought he owned. By the end of the week, she'd moved thousands into a separate account opened under her maiden name, small enough to avoid suspicion, large enough to make a difference. Then came the wellness retreat. Marina told Robert she'd found a program in the countryside, a women's weekend about self-care, yoga, and finding your center. He barely looked up from his phone. Sounds good for you, he said absently. You've been stressed lately. She nodded. You're right, she said. It'll be good to clear my mind. He kissed her on the cheek, distracted, mechanical, and went back to texting. The next morning, she left home with a small suitcase and a larger plan. Instead of the retreat, Marina checked into a modest business hotel on the other side of town. From there, she worked quietly. She met with her lawyer. She moved funds. She signed documents transferring her portion of the family trust into her sole ownership. She drafted a power of attorney limiting Robert's access to certain joint accounts. By the time she was done, the balance of their marriage, emotional and financial, had shifted, though Robert didn't know it yet. On the fourth night, she returned home early. The lights were off, but a car she didn't recognize sat in the driveway. She didn't have to guess whose it was. She stood outside for a moment, looking at her own front door, and smiled. Not in bitterness, but in resolve. Inside, she heard laughter, a clink of glasses, and Robert's voice saying something that once would have broken her. Now it only confirmed what she already knew. He was too blind to see what was coming. She didn't barge in. She didn't make a scene. She simply turned around, walked back to her car, and drove off. Her revenge wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be complete. Over the next few days, Marina continued to dismantle their life together. Quietly, invisibly, legally. The housekeeper noticed things missing. A painting here, a vase there. Marina smiled when asked. Just reorganizing, she'd say. Meanwhile, Robert threw a small party at the Brookside house. He thought he was celebrating a new chapter. Marina knew he was standing in a chapter she was already erasing. Because while he poured champagne for Chloe, Marina's lawyer filed the final paperwork transferring control of their shared business accounts, and with them, his liquidity, to her. By the time Robert realized what was happening, every door that had once opened for him would be locked. Every credit line he used to fund his double life would evaporate. That night, Marina sat by the window of her study, the storm outside echoing the one she'd built within. She didn't feel guilt, only balance. The next phase would not be about hiding. It would be about revealing, on her terms, in her time. And when it happened, it wouldn't just strip him of money, it would strip him of the illusion of control. Marina set her teacup down, folded her hands, and whispered to herself, calm and certain. He thought he could live two lives. I'm just helping him see there's only one, and it's mine now. The downfall began on a Wednesday morning, the kind of day that looked harmless on the surface. Sunlight slid through the curtains, the smell of coffee filled the air, and Robert Carter thought it was going to be another ordinary day. He didn't yet know that his world had already been sold out from under him. He came downstairs humming, glancing at his watch, adjusting his cufflinks like always. Marina stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal. Her face was calm, unreadable, serene in a way that might have unsettled him if he'd been paying attention. Going to be a long day, he said, grabbing his travel mug. Big client lunch, some meetings. Don't wait up. I never do, Marina replied with quiet finality. It wasn't bitterness, it was closure. The moment the door closed, Marina exhaled slowly, as though releasing the last trace of the woman who once waited up for him. She moved through the house like a conductor, ensuring each detail of her final act was perfect. The lawyer had delivered the confirmation papers last night. The accounts were secured, the shares transferred, the car titles switched, the deeds filed. Everything Robert had ever signed, every careless signature on a joint form, every dotted line he never read, had been used to unbuild his empire. By noon, she was gone. When Robert returned home that evening, everything looked lighter, too light. The dining room table, the antique clock, the crystal bar set he'd once bragged about to investors, all gone. Even the walls looked emptier, stripped of framed photos that had once chronicled their perfect marriage. Marina, he called. No answer. He walked through the house, his steps echoing in the hollow rooms. Panic began to creep in when he saw the bedroom. Half empty, her clothes gone, the jewelry chest missing, the closet shelves bare. On the dresser sat a thick envelope with his name written in her graceful handwriting. He tore it open. Inside were documents, photocopies, receipts, in a single-page note. You bought her a house. I sold your world. Robert's hands trembled as he flipped through the paperwork. Property transfers, account statements, and business filings all stamped, signed, and sealed. Every page spelled the same truth. Marina had outmaneuvered him completely. He stumbled into his office, frantically opening his laptop. Passwords failed, access denied. His company account locked. The joint investment portal frozen. The credit card he tried to use for a desperate transfer was declined. His phone rang, and he snatched it up. It was his assistant, voice nervous. "Sir, the bank called. There's been a restructuring of account ownership. They said your wife submitted verified authorizations weeks ago." He hung up mid-sentence. His palms were sweating. His mind raced. Weeks ago. While he'd been at the Brookside house laughing over wine, Marina had been turning their shared fortune into a personal exodus. When he finally reached the bank himself, the words, "Your authorization is no longer valid," felt like a sentence being read aloud in court. Hours later, Robert drove to Brookside Lane. Chloe greeted him at the door in confusion. "You look awful," she said. He pushed past her, grabbing a bottle of scotch from the counter. "We need to talk." But Chloe's expression changed when he mentioned the deed. She frowned. "What do you mean it's frozen?" He explained. The house wasn't truly his anymore. It had been purchased through a company account, and those assets were now locked under Marina's authority pending legal review. The color drained from Chloe's face. "You said it was yours." "It was," he shouted, slamming the glass down. "It was all mine." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't true. None of it had been his. Not the business, not the money, not even the house he'd built for lies. Marina had held it all together, quietly for decades. And now, with the same grace she'd once used to host his clients, she had taken it back. Chloe turned away, her voice sharp. "You ruined my life." "No," Robert said bitterly, pouring another drink. "I just ruined my own." Across town, Marina sat in a quiet lakeside inn, a cup of tea in her hands. The view outside was peaceful, golden leaves floating on still water. Her phone buzzed again and again, calls from Robert, texts from unknown numbers, even a message from Chloe. She didn't open any of them. On the table beside her sat another envelope, her divorce papers already prepared, ready to file. The attorney's note on top read, "Everything is in your favor, whenever you're ready." She wasn't rushing. Revenge, she'd learned, wasn't about the explosion. It was about the silence that followed. Marina watched the reflection of the sun sink into the water, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. She whispered to herself, almost smiling. "He built a house for deceit. I built a home for freedom." And for the first time in a very long time, she believed it. 2 weeks passed before she agreed to meet him. 2 weeks of silence that carved deep lines into Robert's face, the same way guilt had carved hollows into his life. He'd sent emails, letters, messages through mutual friends, all ignored. When the meeting finally came, it wasn't in their old home or his office. Marina chose the place herself, a quiet cafe near the courthouse, sunlight pouring through lace curtains, the scent of roasted coffee soft in the air. She arrived first, calm, composed. Not the ghost of the woman he'd betrayed, but something far stronger, like marble polished smooth by fire. When Robert entered, the sound of the door chime cut through the air, followed by his hesitant footsteps. He looked smaller somehow. The sharp suit couldn't hide the exhaustion, the defeated slump in his shoulders. His eyes searched hers for a softness that no longer existed. "Marina," he said quietly, sitting down, "you look good." "I am," she replied simply. For a moment, neither spoke. The cafe's hum filled the space between them. Clinking cups, low laughter, a distant jazz tune. Then Robert cleared his throat, his voice trembling at the edges. "I made a mistake," he began. "I don't know what I was thinking. She meant nothing, really. It was stupid and selfish and—" Marina raised a hand gently, stopping him. "Please, don't insult me by pretending this was about a mistake. You don't buy a house for a mistake, Robert. You build one." He flinched, looking down. "I was lost. You know how busy things got. The company, the pressure." She leaned forward slightly, her tone almost kind. "You were not lost. You were comfortable. There's a difference. The words landed heavy. Robert rubbed his forehead, his voice breaking. Marina, I'll fix it. I'll make it right. I'll sell everything if I have to. We can start over. She studied him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. Not cruelly, but with the certainty of someone who'd finally stopped waiting for apologies that meant nothing. You already did sell everything, she said. You just didn't know it. He looked up, confused. I sold the life you took for granted, she continued, her voice steady. The cars, the investments, the business shares, every little piece you thought had your name on it. I sold it all, Robert, because you signed those permissions long ago, trusting that I would never use them. But I did, and I made sure that for once, something in your world truly belonged to me. He sat back, pale. You can't just... I can, she interrupted softly. And I did. It's all legal. Every signature, every transfer. I checked twice. Silence stretched between them again. The sound of the espresso machine hissed behind the counter like a whisper of judgment. Finally, Robert's voice came out as a whisper. You've destroyed me. No, Marina said. You destroyed us. I just collected what was left. His eyes filled, but she didn't feel pity. Not anymore. The man across from her wasn't her husband. He was the consequence of his own choices, wrapped in regret and designer guilt. He reached across the table, his voice raw. I loved you once. Marina looked down at his hand, the same hand that had signed away their security, their trust, their vows, and slowly pulled hers back. Then you should have acted like it. She opened her purse, pulled out an envelope, and slid it across the table. The divorce papers, she said. My lawyer's contact is inside. You'll find everything divided fairly. I didn't take more than what was mine. Just the truth. Robert didn't open it. He just stared at her, lost. You'll regret this, he said weakly, the last trace of his old arrogance surfacing like a dying flame. Marina stood gathering her coat. No, she said softly. Regret was what kept me beside you all those years. I'm done with that now. As she turned to leave, he called after her, his voice trembling. Marina, what am I supposed to do now? She paused at the door, the sunlight outlining her figure like a quiet halo. Without turning, she said, You built a house for lies, Robert. I just made sure it had no foundation. Then she walked out. The air outside was crisp, the sky wide and bright. Marina stood for a moment on the sidewalk, closing her eyes as the breeze touched her face. For the first time in decades, she felt light. No weight, no pretending, just freedom. She walked to her car, not the luxury sedan Robert had loved, but a simple silver one she'd bought herself. When she slid into the driver's seat, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Strong lines, calm eyes, a hint of a smile. The road ahead stretched open, and for the first time, it belonged to her. As the cafe disappeared in the rearview mirror, Marina whispered the words that had carried her through the storm. Love can make a woman gentle. Betrayal can make her legendary. And with that, she drove into the sunlight, not running from the past, but toward the life she had finally claimed.